Imagine waking up one morning. No pharmacy, no store, no pads, no tampons, just you, a cave, and a problem that was not going away. This happened to every single woman who ever lived before the year 1880. We are talking about billions of women across hundreds of thousands of years who figured this out from scratch every single month. And the way they did it will genuinely surprise you. Here is something that will mess with your head. Menstruation has existed for as long as human females have 300,000 years. And for most of that time, nobody wrote about it. Not one word. The ancient Egyptians documented everything. Their taxes, their wars, their medical procedures, their dreams. But detailed records about how women managed their periods? Almost nothing. The Greeks wrote philosophy for centuries. The Romans built a legal system that still influences law today. But the daily reality of half their population? Basically ignored. Here's why that matters. The people who wrote history were almost always men. And men did not experience this. So they either ignored it completely, or they wrote the most spectacularly wrong things you have ever heard in your... We will get to that part, trust me. It is worth waiting for. But first, let us talk about what women were actually doing. Because here is the thing nobody tells you. Ancient women were not helpless. They were not suffering in silence with zero solution. They were problem solvers. And they had been solving this exact problem for thousands of years before anyone bothered to write it down. Did you know? The first written medical reference to menstruation appears in the Kahun papyrus from ancient Egypt, dated around 1825 BCE. That is nearly 4,000 years ago. 4,000 years of documented knowledge, and we barely talk about it. So what were they actually using? Let us start with the most important thing to understand. Ancient women used what they had, and what they had, depending on where they lived, was actually pretty clever. Egypt first. Egyptian women are believed to have used softened papyrus as a primitive pad. Think about that for a sec. Papyrus is the same plant they use to make paper. When you soften it, it becomes flexible, absorbent, and surprisingly comfortable. They also used rolls of soft linen, the same material used for everything from clothing to wrapping mummies. Linen is actually a fantastic choice. It is breathable, it is washable, it is reusable, it is absorbent. The Egyptians were not struggling. They had a system. And here is the cultural piece that makes Egypt genuinely remarkable. In ancient Egypt, menstruation was not shameful. It was connected to the goddess Isis, to fertility, to the flooding of the Nile, which was literally the source of all Egyptian agriculture and life. Egyptian women were not isolated. They were not restricted. They continued working, worshiping, and living their full lives. Egypt was genuinely ahead of everyone else on this. Now, ancient Greek women used wool. Specifically, small folded wool pads or soft wool plugs worn internally. This is not as strange as it sounds. Greece was a civilization built significantly around sheep farming. Wool was everywhere. It was soft, absorbent, and cheap. Greek physicians, including Hippocrates, actually wrote about menstruation as a normal bodily function connected to overall health. Missing periods were considered a medical problem requiring treatment. That is surprisingly sophisticated. But then there was Aristotle. And Aristotle had thoughts. One of the most celebrated minds in Western history, wrote that menstrual blood was essentially failed semen. His actual theory was that women's bodies tried to produce semen just like men did, but because women were inherently colder and weaker, the process failed, and the result was menstrual blood. This was not a fringe idea. This was the mainstream scientific consensus of the ancient Greek world, and people believed it for centuries. Did you know? Aristotle's theories about women's biology were taught in European universities as late as the 1600s. That is almost 2,000 years of one man being spectacularly wrong about basic biology. Moving on. Roman women used sea sponges. The Mediterranean Sea was full of natural sponges. They were soft, highly absorbent, and reusable after washing. This is actually a brilliant solution. Natural sea sponges have been used medically across cultures for thousands of years. They are gentle, effective, and completely natural. Wealthy Roman women also had access to fine, soft linen and wool. Poor women used rougher cloth or rags. The gap between rich and poor women was significant, and that gap existed in every civilization we will look at today. Now, here's where Rome gets interesting. Pliny the Elder, a Roman writer who basically considered himself an expert on everything, wrote an encyclopedia called Natural History. His section on menstruation is one of the most confidently wrong things ever committed to writing. According to Pliny, menstrual blood could kill crops if a woman walked through a field, blunt swords if she touched them, turn wine to vinegar, kill bees, make dogs go mad, cause iron to rust and bronze to blacken. And our personal favorite, repel hailstorms and whirlwinds. Ancient Rome essentially believed menstruating women were walking environmental disaster. Regular Roman women obviously did not believe any of this. They went to markets, they raised children, they ran households, they participated in religious festivals. But the fact that this was published in a serious encyclopedia and believed by educated men tells you everything about who was writing history and what they were paying attention. Did you know? Pliny's Natural History was considered a serious scientific reference text in Europe until well into the Middle Ages. Hundreds of years of people genuinely worried about sword-blunting women walking through their fields. Here is something important that most history books skip entirely. Ancient women did not just have to manage their periods physically, they had to manage them socially. Because across a stunning number of ancient cultures, menstruation triggered rules, restriction, ritual requirements that fundamentally changed how a woman could participate in society for those days every month. In ancient Jewish law, a menstruating woman was considered ritually impure. She could not be touched. She could not touch certain objects. After her period ended, she had to undergo ritual purification through immersion in a special bath called a mikveh before resuming normal life. These rules were not about hygiene in any modern sense. They were about ritual purity, a completely separate category that governed religious and social life. Similar restrictions appear in ancient Hindu texts. Menstruating women were restricted from cooking, entering temples, and touching men. Ancient Zoroastrian texts go even further. Menstruating women were to be kept in isolation, given limited food, denied contact with fire, water, and the earth itself. In many indigenous cultures across the Americas, Africa, and Asia, menstruating women temporarily lived in dedicated spaces separate from the main community, sometimes called moon lodges. Here is the part that surprises most people. In many of these traditions, this was not punishment, it was recognition. The woman was considered to be at her most spiritually powerful during this time. She was set apart not because she was dangerous, but because she was significant. The framing varied wildly depending on the culture, but the practical reality was consistent. Whatever restrictions existed, women managed their periods within them, with whatever materials they had available, under whatever social conditions their culture required. They adapted. They always adapted. Here is something genuinely surprising. Ancient women did not just manage the physical reality of menstruation. They managed the pain. And they were surprisingly good at it. Across every culture we have looked at, ancient medical texts contain references to painful menstruation and treatments. The Greeks used warm compresses and herbal infusions. Hippocrates specifically recommended heat and movement for menstrual cramp. Chinese medicine had elaborate formulas specifically designed for menstrual pain. Many of these formulas are still used in traditional Chinese medicine. The core ingredients, ginger, cinnamon, and fennel, have been shown in modern research to have measurable anti-inflammatory effects. Medieval European herbalists used plants called emenog, substances that stimulate menstrual flow and reduce cramping. Chamomile, ginger, parsley, pennyroyal. These are not random guesses. These plants contain compounds that modern pharmacology has confirmed can reduce inflammation and ease muscle contraction. Did you know? Ginger has been shown in clinical trials to reduce menstrual pain as effectively as ibuprofen in some studies. Ancient women were prescribing ginger for period pain thousands of years before ibuprofen existed. They figured this out through thousands of years of trial and error. Women trying, women reporting back, women passing knowledge to their daughters. Generation after generation of accumulated practical wisdom that was almost never written down, because the people doing the writing were not paying attention. So here is what we actually learned today. For 300,000 years, before pharmacies, before modern medicine, before disposable pads, women handled this every single month. They used papyrus in Egypt, wool in Greece, sea sponges in Rome, silk and cotton in China, plant fibers in the Americas. They developed herbal medicines that actually worked. They navigated social restrictions that were sometimes oppressive and sometimes surprisingly empowering, depending on the culture. And they passed all of this knowledge forward, woman to woman, mother to daughter, generation to generation, in a tradition of practical wisdom that almost never made it into official history. Because the people writing history were mostly men, and men were too busy writing about sword battles and political systems to document the daily reality of half the human population. Here is the most important thing to take away from all of this. These women were not passive. They were not helpless. They were not defined by this challenge. They solved it, repeatedly, ingenious, with whatever they had. The modern disposable pad was not invented until 1888. Everything before that was these women figuring it out every month for 300,000 years. If this changed how you see ancient history, hit that like button right now and subscribe, because next time we are asking an equally fascinating question that nobody talks about. How did ancient humans actually sleep? The answer is going to completely surprise you. See you in the next one.